The rain fell in relentless, slanting sheets against the panoramic windows of the Gilded Spoon, blurring the glittering lights of the city into a watercolor wash. Inside, the world was a cocoon of warmth and hushed elegance. The low hum of sophisticated conversation mingled with the gentle clinking of silver on porcelain and the distant melodic sighs of a lone piano. For Amelia, this cocoon was both a sanctuary and a cage. Each polished fork, each crisply folded napkin, each perfectly placed wine glass was a small step towards the goal that consumed her every waking moment. Lily's next treatment. Her younger sister's breath was a fragile, precious thing, and the specialists who could preserve it charged a king's ransom. So Amelia smiled. She smiled when her feet ached from 10 hours on the marble floors. She smiled when a patron dismissed her with a flick of his wrist. She smiled because her smile, her impeccable service, was the armor she wore into battle every single day. Tonight her smile felt brittle. Seated at table 7, the prime spot by the window, were Tiffany Sterling and Jessica Finch. They weren't just customers, they were an event. A recurring storm system that passed through the restaurant, leaving a trail of quiet misery. Tiffany, with her razor-sharp bob and eyes the color of ice, was the undisputed queen. Her voice a low, cutting murmur that could flay a person's confidence in seconds. Jessica, her shadow, echoed her laughter and amplified her disdain. "Amelia," Tiffany called, her voice slicing through the restaurant's ambient charm. She didn't raise it, she didn't have to. It was pitched to carry, to command. Amelia was there in an instant, a water pitcher in hand. "Yes, Ms. Sterling? Is everything to your liking?" Tiffany picked at an imaginary thread on her silk blouse. "This water," she said, tapping a manicured nail against her crystal goblet, "tastes stale, as if it's been sitting out for an hour." Amelia's professional smile didn't waver, though she had poured it from a freshly opened bottle of San Pellegrino not 5 minutes ago. "I do apologize. I'll bring you a new bottle immediately." "See that you do," Jessica chimed in, wrinkling her nose as if Amelia had presented her with a cup of mud. As Amelia turned, her eyes met those of a man sitting alone at a small table near the bar. He was a new face, someone she hadn't seen before. He was dressed simply, in a dark sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the designer labels that populated the room. He'd been nursing the same coffee for an hour, watching the room with an unnerving stillness. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the scene he'd just witnessed. Amelia felt a strange flutter of something. Validation, perhaps. She quickly looked away, her focus returning to her duties. Her favorite table, number 12, was occupied by Mrs. Eleanor Vance. A widow in her late 70s, Mrs. Vance came in every Friday, always ordered the pan-seared salmon, and always read a worn copy of a poetry book while she ate. She was a quiet island of grace in an ocean of entitlement. "Everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Vance asked in her soft, papery voice as Amelia refilled her water glass. "Perfectly fine, Mrs. Vance. Can I get you anything else?" "No, thank you, Amelia. You take good care of me." The old woman's smile was genuine, a small gift that warmed Amelia more than any tip. Amelia returned to table 7 with a new, chilled bottle of sparkling water, presenting it with the practiced flair of a sommelier. She opened it with a crisp hiss and poured, ensuring not a single drop was spilled. Tiffany watched her, her lips curled into a smirk. "Better," she conceded, then waved a dismissive hand. "You may go." Amelia retreated, the word "go" echoing in her ears like a command given to a dog. She glanced towards the man at the bar. He was still watching, his expression unreadable, his gaze now fixed on Tiffany and Jessica. For the first time, Amelia noticed the quiet intensity in his eyes. He wasn't just observing, he was assessing. He was seeing everything. The thought was both unsettling and strangely comforting. The night was far from over, and the storm at table 7 was only just beginning to gather strength. The meal progressed like a slow, deliberate torture. The steak was over-seasoned, though it was prepared exactly as the chef always did. The risotto was too firm, then the replacement was too soft. Each complaint was delivered with a sigh of profound disappointment, as if Amelia's incompetence was personally ruining their evening. With each trip back to the kitchen, Amelia could feel the glare of the manager, Mr. Henderson, on her back. He was a man whose spine seemed to be made of jelly, firm only when reprimanding his staff, but dissolving into obsequious goo in the presence of wealthy patrons. "Amelia," he hissed, cornering her by the service station, "Table 7 is worth more in one night than you are in a year. Whatever they want, they get. Do you understand me? Keep them happy." "I'm trying, Mr. Henderson. They seem determined not to be." "Then try harder," he snapped, before scurrying away. Amelia took a deep breath, clutching the silver tray to her chest. The metal was cold against her frantic heartbeat. She thought of Lily, of the rhythmic puff of her nebulizer, the sound that was both a comfort and a constant, terrifying reminder of her fragility. She could endure this. She had to. She returned to the table to clear their main course plates. As she reached for Tiffany's plate, her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. A single tiny droplet of condensation from the water pitcher on her tray fell, landing on the sleeve of Tiffany's pristine white blazer. It was no bigger than a pinhead. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. "Are you serious?" Tiffany shrieked, her voice no longer a murmur, but a sharp, ugly sound that made heads turn all over the dining room. She shot up from her chair, holding her arm out as if she'd been doused in acid. "Look what you did. This is a Chanel blazer. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" "I am so terribly sorry, Ms. Sterling," Amelia stammered, her face flooding with color. "It was an accident, just a drop of water." "A drop," Jessica scoffed, rising to her friend's defense. "She's ruined it. You're clumsy and incompetent. People like you shouldn't be allowed to work in places like this." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The entire restaurant was now watching, a silent audience to Amelia's public humiliation. Mr. Henderson was already gliding towards them, his face a mask of panicked apology. But before he could get there, another voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, yet firm. The young lady apologized. It was a minor accident. There is no need for such a scene. All eyes turned to table 12. Mrs. Vance had placed her book down. She was looking at Tiffany and Jessica, her expression not angry, but profoundly disappointed. Her quiet dignity was a stark rebuke to their manufactured outrage. Tiffany's icy gaze swiveled to the old woman. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "And who are you?" "Her grandmother. You should teach her some manners. Or perhaps," she added, her eyes glittering with malice, "you both need a lesson in what happens when you disrespect your betters." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Tiffany snatched the heavy glass pitcher of ice water from the table. The condensation dripped from its sides, cold and menacing. Amelia's heart stopped. "Ms. Sterling, please." Tiffany ignored her. With a fluid, deliberate motion, she inverted the pitcher over Amelia's head. A cascade of ice-cold water and clattering cubes streamed down, soaking her hair, her uniform, her skin. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. The water plastered her blouse to her skin, dripping in a miserable puddle at her feet. She stood frozen, shivering, the shock and humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. But Tiffany wasn't finished. Her face was twisted into a mask of triumphant cruelty. She turned her venomous attention to the woman who had dared to defend the help. "And you old hag," she spat. "You need to cool down." She stalked over to Mrs. Vance's table. The old woman looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief, a flicker of fear finally breaking through her composure. Before anyone could react, Tiffany emptied the remaining contents of the pitcher directly onto Mrs. Vance's head. The water drenched her silver hair, ran down her wrinkled face, and soaked the front of her simple tweed jacket. The poetry book on the table was ruined, its pages instantly warped and saturated. For a moment, there was absolute stunned silence. The only sound was the dripping of water onto the floor and the ragged, shocked breaths of the onlookers. Mrs. Vance sat perfectly still, trembling, water dripping from her chin onto her lap. A single tear tracing a path through the cold droplets on her cheek. She looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. The man at the bar, the quiet observer, slowly placed his coffee cup down on its saucer. The gentle click was unnervingly loud in the dead silence. He pushed his chair back and rose to his full height. He wasn't exceptionally tall, but he moved with an authority that seemed to take up all the air in the room. And on his face was an expression of such cold, controlled fury that it was more terrifying than any shout. The time for observation was over. Mr. Henderson finally arrived, his face ashen. He scurried past the drenched and shivering Amelia, his entire focus on the aggressor. "Ms. Sterling, is there a problem? Please allow me to handle this." "Your problem is this incompetent waitress and that meddling old woman," Tiffany sneered, tossing the empty pitcher onto the table with a loud clatter. "I expect them both thrown out. And my entire meal, of course, will be complimentary, including the dry cleaning bill for my blazer." Henderson wrung his hands, his eyes darting from Tiffany's furious face to the silent, watching patrons. He made his choice in an instant. He turned to Amelia, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and false authority. "Amelia, you are fired. Get your things and get out. You have caused an unforgivable disturbance." He didn't even glance at Mrs. Vance, who was now being helped by a few concerned diners, her small body racked with shivers. Amelia stared at him, the words hitting her with the force of another dousing of ice water. Fired. The word was a death sentence for Lily. The clinic, the medicine, the hope, it all vanished in that one cowardly pronouncement. Tears of cold, shame, and sheer terror welled in her eyes, mixing with the water still dripping from her hair. She couldn't even find her voice to protest. It was over. "No," a voice said, calm and resonant. It cut through Henderson's pathetic decree with the finality of a judge's gavel. Everyone turned. The man from the bar was now standing beside table 7. He had taken off his simple sweater, and he walked over to Mrs. Vance, gently draping it over her trembling shoulders. "Sir, this is a private matter," Henderson stammered, puffing out his chest. "I am the manager here." "You were the manager," the man corrected him, his voice dangerously low. He didn't look at Henderson, his gaze was locked on Tiffany. "You are also fired." Henderson blinked, a laugh of disbelief bubbling in his throat. "Fired? By whom? You're just a customer." "Security," he called out, though his voice lacked conviction. The man finally turned his head, and the full force of his Arctic gaze fell upon the manager. "My name is Julian Croft, and my father owns this restaurant. He owns the building it's in. He owns the entire Croft Hospitality Group, of which the Gilded Spoon is merely a small, and as of tonight, deeply disappointing part." The name landed in the room like a bomb. Croft. The name was synonymous with luxury, power, and unimaginable wealth. It was on hotels, resorts, and exclusive restaurants across the globe. Tiffany Sterling's face, which had been a mask of smug victory, crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks. Jessica looked like she was about to be physically ill. Mr. Henderson's jaw hung open, his face a comical picture of horror and dawning realization. Julian Croft, the unassuming man in the corner, had been watching them all night. "I came here tonight, under a different name, because we'd been receiving reports of declining standards and inconsistent customer experiences," Julian continued, his voice even and measured, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I wanted to see for myself. And you," he said, his eyes finding Tiffany again, "have given me a truly remarkable demonstration. You are, without a doubt, the most vile, cruel, and entitled human being I have ever had the misfortune of observing." He took a step closer. Tiffany, for the first time, looked afraid. She instinctively took a step back. "You think your father's name gives you power here?" Julian asked, a humorless smile touching his lips. "Mr. Sterling is a minority shareholder in one of our subsidiary real estate funds. His influence is a rounding error on our balance sheets. In fact, I'll be having my father call him first thing in the morning to discuss the liability his daughter has just become to our brand." He then turned his attention to Amelia. She was still standing there, soaked and stunned, trying to process the dizzying turn of events. He looked at her, and for the first time the cold fury in his eyes was replaced by something else. Regret. Empathy. "Miss," he said, his voice softening considerably, "I am profoundly sorry. No employee of ours should ever be subjected to such abuse. What happened here tonight is a failure of our management and a stain on our name. You are not fired. On the contrary, when this is over, we will be discussing your future with the company. A much brighter one, I assure you." He then turned back to the two women and the disgraced manager. His expression hardened once more into a granite mask of authority. He gestured towards the large windows. "The rain has stopped," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "But it's left quite a puddle on the pavement by the entrance. A dirty, gritty mixture of rainwater, street grime, and city filth." He let the image hang in the air. Tiffany and Jessica exchanged panicked glances. They had no idea where this was going, but they knew it was somewhere terrible. "You humiliated this woman," Julian said, gesturing to Amelia. "And you assaulted this elderly lady," he added, indicating Mrs. Vance, who was now watching with wide, stunned eyes. "You treated them as less than human, as things to be used for your own sick amusement. An apology is insufficient. A complimentary meal is an insult. Restitution is required." He pointed a single unwavering finger towards the front door. "You two are going to walk out that door, and you are going to kneel, and you will drink from that puddle. You will taste the filth you tried to make these women feel. It's that, or I will have my legal team press full criminal charges for assault. My company will blacklist you from every reputable establishment in this city and beyond. Your faces will be on the news tomorrow. The choice," he finished, his voice like chipping ice, "is yours." The silence that followed Julian Croft's ultimatum was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from shock, fear, and a terrifying sense of impending justice. Every diner in the restaurant was frozen, their forks halfway to their mouths, their conversations forgotten. They were no longer just patrons, they were witnesses. Tiffany Sterling, who had navigated her entire life on a cushion of wealth and privilege, stared at Julian as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. The concepts of consequence and public humiliation were utterly alien to her. Her mind raced, searching for an angle, a threat, a way out. "You can't be serious," she finally sputtered, her voice a reedy, desperate thing. "This is insane. It's barbaric. My father will sue you into the ground." Julian Croft didn't even blink. "Call him," he said simply. "Put him on speakerphone. I'd love to explain to Robert Sterling that his daughter is facing felony assault charges, and that my offer to make it all disappear involves her tasting a bit of pavement water. I'm sure he, as a businessman, will appreciate the cost-benefit analysis." He pulled out his own phone. "Or I can call my head of security and the police commissioner. They're both on my speed dial. Your move." The mention of the police commissioner seemed to finally break through Tiffany's armor of entitlement. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. This wasn't a manager she could intimidate or a waitress she could belittle. This was a man who held her entire future in the palm of his hand. Her social standing, her reputation, her freedom. All of it was on the line. She looked at Jessica, her eyes pleading. Jessica, however, was a follower, not a leader. She was pale and trembling, her gaze fixed on the dark, wet pavement visible through the glass doors. She looked back at Julian, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," Jessica whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Don't call the police. We'll do it." "Jessica," Tiffany hissed, grabbing her arm, "have you lost your mind?" "I don't want to go to jail, Tiff," Jessica cried, pulling her arm away. "My parents would kill me. This is all your fault." The crack in their united front was all Julian needed. He looked at Tiffany, his expression unyielding. "The offer is for both of you. One of you refuses, the deal is off, and I make the calls." The weight of the choice pressed down on Tiffany. On one side, a few moments of unimaginable degradation. On the other, a lifetime of shame, a criminal record, and the full, crushing weight of the Croft Empire's wrath. The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by a dull, horrified acceptance. She gave a single jerky nod, unable to speak. "Excellent," Julian said, his voice devoid of any triumph. He wasn't enjoying this. He was administering a necessary, painful lesson. He turned to the former manager. "Henderson, you will escort them. You will ensure they fulfill the terms of the agreement. Then you will collect your personal effects and never set foot on Croft property again." Henderson, looking utterly defeated, simply nodded. He gestured numbly towards the door. The walk from Table 7 to the grand entrance of the Gilded Spoon was the longest walk of Tiffany and Jessica's lives. They moved like prisoners on their way to the gallows. Every eye in the room followed them. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft, shame-filled sobs escaping from Jessica. As they reached the door, Julian spoke one last time. "And so everyone is clear," he announced to the room. "This is not a punishment for a spilled drink. This is the consequence for cruelty. This is what happens when you believe your money makes you better than another human being." Henderson opened the heavy glass door. A gust of cold, damp night air swept into the restaurant. The smell of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes briefly overpowered the scent of truffle oil and roasted duck. Tiffany and Jessica stepped out into the harsh light of the street lamps. The puddle was exactly as Julian had described it. A shallow, murky pool in a depression of the pavement, reflecting the city lights in a greasy sheen. It was disgusting. Hesitantly, prodded by a desperate gesture from Henderson, they knelt. The expensive fabrics of their designer outfits soaked up the gritty water. Tiffany's Chanel blazer, the source of the entire conflict, was now stained with street grime. For a moment she paused, her body rigid with revulsion. She looked back through the window, her eyes meeting Julian's. There was no mercy in his gaze, only resolve. With a shudder that racked her entire body, Tiffany Sterling, the queen of Table 7, lowered her head. Jessica followed suit, her sobs now uncontrollable. They drank. It was a quick, desperate act of submission, a baptism in humility. They came up sputtering, coughing, faces streaked with tears and dirty water. The lesson was complete. Inside the restaurant, Amelia watched, her hand covering her mouth. She felt no joy, no sense of victory, only a profound, aching sadness for the ugliness of it all. Beside her, Mrs. Vance, wrapped in Julian's sweater, simply closed her eyes. When Tiffany and Jessica stumbled back to their feet, they didn't look back. They fled into the night, their dignity in tatters, disappearing into the city that had, until that moment, always been their playground. The spectacle was over. A strange electric calm descended upon the room. The low murmur of conversation slowly returned, but it was different now, hushed and charged with the gravity of what everyone had just seen. Julian Croft turned from the window, his face a mask of cold composure, and walked directly to table 12. He knelt beside the old woman's chair, his earlier concern returning, but laced with something else, something familiar and intimate. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice for her ears alone, though in the quiet room, it carried. "Are you all right?" Amelia's head snapped up. "Eleanor? Not Mrs. Vance?" The old woman opened her eyes. The fragile, broken look was gone. In its place was a glint of steel, as sharp and clear as Julian's. She reached up and patted his hand. "I'm perfectly fine, Julian. A little damp, but I must say the performance was worth the price of admission." She took the bait even more spectacularly than we'd hoped. A ripple of shock went through the staff and the few remaining patrons who overheard. Amelia stared, her mind struggling to connect the pieces. Bait? Hoped? Eleanor Vance looked over at Amelia, and her soft grandmotherly smile returned, but now Amelia could see the formidable intelligence behind it. "You, my dear, were magnificent. You held your composure under fire with a grace I haven't seen in years." I don't understand," Amelia stammered, looking between the two of them. Julian stood and gestured to the now vacant table 7. "Let's sit. There's more to tonight than a simple quality check." He guided both Amelia and Eleanor to the table, the site of the humiliation now transformed into a command center. A waiter, sensing the shift in power, rushed over with dry towels and hot tea. "My undercover story was only partially true," Julian began, his voice low and serious. "We have been having service issues, largely due to spineless management like Henderson. But I was here for a much bigger reason. I was here for Tiffany Sterling." He paused, letting the statement sink in. "Her father, Robert Sterling, has been trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of a key division within our company. He's been using blackmail, spreading rumors. It's been a dirty, ugly fight behind the scenes. We've been looking for leverage, something to force him to back down. Something clean." Eleanor continued the story, her voice losing its papery quality and taking on the crisp authority of a boardroom executive. "Robert's greatest weakness has always been his daughter. He indulges her every whim, cleans up her every mess. We knew from her social media, from whispers, that she was a monster. We just needed to prove it. We needed a public, undeniable, and catastrophic display of her character. Amelia's mind was reeling. So, you knew this would happen? We knew she was volatile, Julian corrected gently. We couldn't have predicted the specifics, but we knew if provoked, she would self-destruct. Eleanor's role, he said, nodding to the woman beside him, was to be my eyes and, if necessary, to provide the spark. Eleanor Vance isn't just a lover of poetry. She was on my father's executive board for 30 years. She's forgotten more about corporate strategy than Robert Sterling will ever know. Amelia remembered Eleanor's quiet intervention. The young lady apologized. There is no need for such a scene. It wasn't a plea. It was a calculated move. It was the final push Tiffany needed to go completely over the edge. As if on cue, Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Speak of the devil," he answered, putting the call on speaker. "Julian, what in God's name is going on?" A man's voice, apoplectic with rage, boomed from the small device. "Tiffany just called me incoherent. She said you made her drink from a puddle, Robert?" "Yes, I did," Julian cut in, his voice dangerously calm. "Right after she assaulted one of my staff and then physically attacked Eleanor Vance in front of 24 witnesses." There was a sudden, choked silence on the other end of the line. "Eleanor Vance? Our Eleanor Vance?" "The very same," Julian confirmed. "I have a restaurant full of people who watched your daughter douse an 80-year-old woman with ice water because she dared to defend a waitress. I have it on our security cameras in high definition. I wonder how that footage would look on the nightly news, just as the SEC is reviewing your latest acquisition proposal." The fury in Robert Sterling's voice evaporated, replaced by the cold dread of a man watching his empire crumble. "What do you want, Julian?" "You know what I want," Julian said. "Your takeover bid is withdrawn. Effective immediately, you will sell back your minority shares to us at yesterday's market price, and you will issue a formal public apology to both this restaurant and to Ms. Vance. In return, the security footage remains in-house, and no criminal charges will be filed against your liability of a daughter. Do we have a deal?" A long, defeated sigh came through the phone. "Deal." The line went dead. Julian placed the phone on the table. It was over. A corporate war had just been won, not in a boardroom, but in a restaurant, with a pitcher of ice water and a puddle of filth. He turned his full attention back to Amelia, who had listened to the entire exchange with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Amelia, you were caught in the middle of a war you didn't know you were fighting. You were our unwitting soldier, and you were braver than any of them. That character, that strength. It's a resource more valuable than any of Robert Sterling's shares." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Henderson's position is vacant. I'm not just offering you a job, I'm offering you a promotion. I want you to run this restaurant. We'll put you through our top executive training program. We'll give you every tool you need to succeed. We're purging the weakness from this company, and we're replacing it with strength. We're replacing it with people like you." Amelia stared at him, the world spinning in a dizzying vortex of shock and possibility. The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of silver, the murmuring voices, faded into a distant buzzing roar. Manager, executive training. The words felt like they belonged to a different language, a different life. She looked down at her hands, still slightly damp. The nails clipped short for practicality. These hands knew the weight of a heavy tray, the precise angle to pour wine, the sting of cleaning chemicals. Could they hold a pen to sign purchase orders? Could they command a room? A deep, cold knot of fear, a phantom of the ice water, tightened in her stomach. It was the terror of the unknown, of a world she had only ever looked at through a pane of glass. "But why me?" she finally managed, her voice a near whisper. "I'm a waitress. I don't have a business degree. I don't know the first thing about running a business of this caliber." It was Eleanor who answered, her voice a comforting blend of her two personas, the gentle patron and the shrewd executive. "My dear, we can teach anyone to read a balance sheet. We can train someone to manage inventory. What we cannot teach is what you showed tonight. Integrity, grace under unimaginable pressure. Empathy. When that monster screamed at you, you didn't cower or lash out. You maintained your professionalism. When she assaulted you, your first instinct was still to de-escalate. You didn't just endure, you protected your dignity without sacrificing your kindness. You are precisely what this company, what this restaurant, needs at its heart. Julian nodded, his gaze unwavering and intense. Amelia, I watched you all night. I saw how you handled their absurd complaints with patience. I saw the genuine warmth you showed Eleanor. I saw the flicker of defiance in your eyes when Henderson tried to intimidate you. That's not a waitress. That's a leader who hasn't been given the chance to lead. We don't just want to offer you a job. We want to invest in you. The program is 6 weeks at our flagship training center in Geneva. All expenses paid, of course. And while you're there... He paused, his expression softening as if he could see the one question screaming behind her eyes. Your sister's medical care will be fully covered under the Croft Executive Health Plan, effective immediately. We'll also arrange for a premier private nurse to be with her around the clock while you're away, to ensure she has the best possible care. That was it, the final overwhelming piece, the mention of Lily. Not as a problem or a burden, but as a person to be cared for, a part of the package. It shattered the last of Amelia's defenses. The fear didn't vanish, but it was suddenly eclipsed by a tidal wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. The tears that had been frozen inside her since the moment the picture was lifted began to fall, but they were not tears of shame or terror. They were hot, cleansing tears of gratitude. The dam of her composure, held together with sheer will for so long for Lily's sake, finally broke. She covered her face with her hands, a sob escaping her lips. It wasn't a sound of weakness, but of a profound, soul-shaking release. A weight she had carried alone for years, the crushing daily fear for her sister's life, had just been lifted from her shoulders. Eleanor reached across the table and placed a warm, steady hand on her arm. It's all right, child. It's all right now. Welcome to the family. After a long moment, Amelia looked up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She took a deep, shuddering breath and met Julian's gaze. The brittle armor was gone. In its place was a raw, resolute strength. A slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine, unforced smile she'd had all night. It was no longer a shield. It was a weapon she had just been handed. When do I start? She asked, her voice clear and steady. A week later, Amelia stood on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, the crisp Swiss air a world away from the humid city streets she had left behind. The Croft training facility was less a campus and more a palace, a place of quiet, intense focus where the future leaders of a global empire were forged. She was surrounded by people with Ivy League degrees and years of management experience who spoke in a rapid-fire shorthand of profit margins and supply chain logistics. The fear she'd felt that night in the restaurant returned, a cold, creeping doubt that she was an imposter, a waitress in a queen's castle. Her first week was a blur of seminars on finance, human resources, and brand management. She filled notebooks with frantic scribbles, her head swimming with acronyms and theories. But then came the practical simulations. They were put into high-pressure scenarios, an irate Michelin inspector, a critical supply failure, a media crisis. And there, Amelia found her footing. While others quoted textbooks, she remembered the tremor in a customer's hand, the panicked look in a new waiter's eyes, the precise moment a situation could be soothed with a kind word or diffused with an unshakable calm. Her empathy wasn't a weakness, it was a diagnostic tool. Her years of service had given her a PhD in human nature, and it was a language none of her classmates spoke as fluently. One evening, a video call illuminated her sterile, modern room. Lily's face appeared, her smile wider and her breath less labored than Amelia had seen in years. A kind-faced woman in nurse's scrubs waved from the background. "Millie, you won't believe it," Lily chirped, holding up a drawing of 2 stick figures on a mountain. "Dr. Evans says my lung capacity is up by 10%. And Nurse Catherine is teaching me to bake. We made cookies today. They were a little burnt, but she said that's how you learn." Amelia's heart swelled. The guilt she felt for being so far away was washed away by the pure, undeniable evidence of her right choice. This was why she was here. This was the goal. Lily was safe. She was thriving. Now it was Amelia's turn to learn. 3 months after that rainy night, Amelia stood near the host stand of the Gilded Spoon. The restaurant was the same, yet entirely different. The elegance remained, the crystal still sparkled, but the oppressive, sterile silence of fear had been replaced by a warm, vibrant energy. The staff moved with a new purpose, a lightness in their step born of respect, not intimidation. Amelia, dressed not in a uniform but in a perfectly tailored navy suit, was the source of that energy. Her posture was poised, her gaze sweeping across the dining room with an owner's eye. Her command was quiet but absolute. A new couple, the Van Asters, were seated at table 7. They had the same air of inherited wealth as the Sterlings, and the same dismissive way of looking at the staff. They had already sent back a bottle of wine, claiming it was corked, when Amelia knew for a fact it was a perfect vintage. Now Mrs. Van Aster was tapping her glass with a manicured nail, a chilling echo of the night that had changed everything. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice pitched to carry. "This sea bass is dry. I can't possibly eat this." A young waitress named Clara approached, her face pale with nerves. "I'm very sorry, madam. I can have the chef prepare another—" "Don't bother," Mr. Van Aster cut in. "The moment is ruined. We expect this dish to be removed from our bill, and for our trouble, a complimentary round of dessert wine, the Chateau de Chem." It was a power play, a test. Clara looked helplessly toward Amelia. In the old days under Henderson, she would have been forced to grovel and comply. But these were not the old days. Amelia glided over to the table, her presence calm and authoritative. "Mr. and Mrs. Van Aster, I am Amelia, the general manager. I understand you're not pleased with the sea base." "It's inedible," Mrs. Van Aster sniffed. Amelia smiled, a smile that was polite but held a core of unyielding steel. "Of course. I will have it removed from your bill immediately." She paused, then met the woman's gaze directly. However, Chef Antoine personally inspected the dish before it left the kitchen. He stands by its quality. While I am happy to accommodate your preference by removing the charge, I will not be offering complimentary items as compensation for a dish that meets our highest standards. The couple stared, stunned into silence. They were used to managers who capitulated. "The Gilded Spoon prides itself on 2 things," Amelia continued, her voice even and clear, honed by countless simulations in Geneva. "The quality of our food and the dignity of our staff. We do not reward baseless complaints. Now, if there is anything else I can assist you with, I would be happy to do so." Mr. Van Aster's face flushed with anger, but he saw no weakness in her to exploit. He saw only a woman in complete control. He looked around, perhaps expecting to see a cowed staff, but instead saw a team watching their leader with pride. Defeated, he simply shook his head. They finished the rest of their meal in sullen silence and left a begrudgingly standard tip. As they walked out, Amelia gave Clara a reassuring nod. The girl's shoulders, once tense with fear, relaxed in relief. A small victory, but it was everything. Later that evening, as the restaurant began to wind down, a well-known society columnist held court at a corner table. Amelia, making her rounds, passed just as the woman leaned in conspiratorially. "Utterly catastrophic," the columnist whispered, her voice dripping with schadenfreude. "Robert Sterling's career is finished. The failed takeover was one thing, but the scandal with Tiffany was the nail in the coffin. The story got out, not the whole story, of course, but enough. Assaulting a Croft board member, public humiliation. They're pariahs. I heard Tiffany had to take a job as a personal shopper at a mid-range department store. Can you imagine? From Chanel to clearance racks." Amelia kept walking, her face impassive, but the columnist's words were a quiet, final closing of a chapter. It wasn't triumph she felt, but a cold, clear sense of order restored. The universe, with a little help, had balanced its books. Her gaze drifted to table 12. Eleanor Vance sat in her usual spot, a new book of poetry open before her. Opposite her sat Julian Croft. They weren't there as corporate strategists or secret observers anymore. They were simply patrons, enjoying the fruits of their gambit. Julian caught Amelia's eye from across the room. He lifted his wine glass in a silent toast. It was a gesture of respect, of partnership. Amelia walked over, a sense of belonging settling over her like a warm cloak. She handled the Van Asters like a seasoned professional, Eleanor said to Julian, though her warm smile was directed at Amelia. I believe our investment is already paying dividends. I had good teachers, Amelia replied, a genuine warmth in her voice. You had good instincts, Julian corrected. We just gave you the vocabulary for them. The Gilded Spoon hasn't seen numbers this good in 5 years. Staff turnover is at an all-time low. You've done more than just manage this place, Amelia. You've healed it. He looked at her, and she saw in his eyes not just a boss, but a partner, an ally who had seen her at her lowest and recognized her true worth. The dynamic between them had shifted from savior and victim to one of mutual respect. Amelia smiled back, a genuine radiant beam that reached her eyes. It was the smile of a woman who had found her power not by being cruel, but by being resilient. She nodded back at him, a silent acknowledgement of the life she had been given and the future she was now building for herself and for Lily, one perfectly placed, dignified fork at a time. The battle was over, and the cage had become her kingdom.